Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael. And today we are going to be talking with Reverend Jim McGrath about the book of Revelation and apocalyptic literature. But first, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody. I think we're going to have an amazing show today, and I'm really, really looking forward to this topic because I think it's very fascinating. We have a couple of shows coming up still, which I think are going to be a lot of fun. And next week, we have Ray Davis, our good friend who's a recording artist and very esoteric guy, and he's going to talk about music and how it connects to shifting consciousness. So I think that's going to be a fun show. And then we're going to be into the month of December already, the end of the year. So we're going to have Mystic Mitten Paranormal from Detroit back visiting with us again. We're going to have our good friend David Ullman back on the show again, and all kinds of other great stuff coming up. So please go to the website, sixthsensesociety.com, S-I-X-T-H, it's spelled out, so sixthsensesociety.com, and you can find out about our next shows and all kinds of info. A big shout out to all of our subscribers. We now have over 400, and we're very blessed. And if you're listening to our show and you like what we're doing, and it's always encouraging to get subscribers, so hit the subscribe button. And a shout out to our friends in the UK. We've got a nice following in the UK at the moment, and we really love you guys too. We hope you are now able to, since we're moving the show earlier in the day, that now you guys can join us live too, and that's great. So we'll be up in the live chat, so if you have any questions for Jim, let me know, and I'll pass them on to him. So with that, I'm going to kick it back to you guys and have a great show.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Welcome back.
Thanks.
We're happy to have you again.
Oh, it's always great to be here. I love it here.
So for those of you that don't know the Reverend, go back to some of the previous shows he's done. We've got a couple of bios on that. We're going to jump right into the topic today because it's a big, juicy topic.
Hot topic.
Yes. So what would you like to start with?
Well, we're talking about apocalyptic literature in general and the book of Revelation in specific. Mm-hmm. So I just want to say a few things just to start off about the book of Revelation. It's not Revelations. It's
I learned that yesterday.
There's only one. That's what most people get wrong when they talk about it. Yeah, it's controversial stuff, meant to be, and it was born out of great controversy. It was the last book admitted into the canonical New Testament, and this is the last book in the New Testament.
And it wasn't easily admitted, is that correct?
No, and a lot of people in the Eastern Church, Eastern Orthodox Church, did not accept it for hundreds of years as part of Scripture. So it's sort of it's the caboose of Scripture in the New Testament that many have tried to dislocate. It's different from the other books of the New Testament. It's called the Revelation of St. John, and John was for a long time generally accepted as John the Apostle, the disciple of Christ. But now it's really believed that there's no way that would be him, because John was not just a disciple of Christ, but he's described in the book of John as being the disciple that Jesus loved. And it doesn't say that he didn't love the others, but it just, he's the only one that got described that way. And so he knew Jesus pretty well. And the John in Revelation is not somebody who knew Jesus face to face. So that's your first clue. Revelation came together toward almost at the very end of the first century. Mm-hmm. And as such, it was born out of the one of the most difficult times for Christians in the Roman Empire. first there was Nero, and Nero, of course, said you have to worship Roman gods, and began to persecute Christians and Jews, because if they wouldn't, now some did, but a lot of the early Christian literature is about honoring those people who wouldn't. You know, I will not deny my God, and they got killed. And the suggestion is always, be like them. You know, so that's a lot of the purpose behind the literature. But after Nero was Domitian, who didn't say you have to worship Roman gods so much, saying you had to worship me. And he went back to the old Julius Caesar definition of being an emperor, which meant that the king was a god. So there was a lot of trouble. He really had a thing about the Christians and the Jews. And in the Roman Empire, they did not necessarily at this point differentiate between the Christians and the Jews. It's not clear when there's a break there. So this is considered to have come together around 95, 96 AD, at the height of the Domitian persecutions. So you have a situation in which Christians are having to live underground. They're worshiping in catacombs, and you know everything they do has to be secret. So the book is very coded, because you couldn't come out and mention Rome in the book.
Right.
So it's against the backdrop of this great persecution. Just as the other important apocalyptic book in the Bible, in the Old Testament, the book of Daniel, was written against a backdrop of the Jews being kidnapped from Jerusalem and the Temple of Solomon being destroyed, and they're living in captivity. And King Nebuchadnezzar is saying you have to worship Babylonian gods. Same situation. And so the book of Daniel is a story of, you know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They said, no, we won't. And Nebuchadnezzar said, throw them into the fire. And they didn't burn. They were still there. And Nebuchadnezzar was very impressed by that. Then you have the story of Daniel in the lion's den. You know, it's just so that the God of the Jews, in the eyes of Nebuchadnezzar, the oppressor, makes a stand. And he sees that, and it's like, ooh, and it affected the way he was treating them in the book of Daniel. So the idea in apocalyptic literature is, never mind the way things are now. That, you know, continue to worship God, and you'll be covered.
At some point.
Yeah. And that the real history is different from what you're seeing. This is beginning to sound familiar, like the way things are today. What you're seeing on the news isn't real.
Also, like, it seems like one group persecutes the other, then the other group persecutes them. Like, like in the pagan world, some of them don't like the Christians because they were persecuting the pagans at some point, but they've forgotten that the Christians were persecuted early on too. So that you would think we would try to maybe try something different, like instead of the same back and forth, Well,
that's one of the downsides of this kind of literature, is it perpetuates the sense of us versus them. And what really riles me is the way that people today, evangelicals and, Christians today, we're not persecuted. There's no, I mean, maybe in some part of the world they are, but, here in our culture, they're the dominant force. Right. But they still think like this. They still think in this us versus them way. And so what we have today is this, the war against Christmas. Oh my goodness. Somebody walked up to me and said, "Happy holidays." And that's like being thrown in the lion's den, I guess, or that's like being killed for your religion. And in my church, people will start talking like this, and I'll get into these conversations about it. And it's at any church. I'm not specifying it's at my church, but he's been, this person walked up to me and said, "Happy holidays." And I said right back to them, "Merry Christmas." I got him. So, and the idea being, some Jew who doesn't celebrate Christmas, for a moment tried to get me to see it from their point of view. And that's persecution. Right. That's being persecuted. That's so the way that evangelicals today look at the world, it's like they're still being persecuted like this.
Right. Big difference.
And this history is over.
Yes.
The enemy in the book of Revelation is Babylon. And Babylon, no, that was the enemy back in book of Daniel. Babylon is a stand-in for Rome. They can't mention Rome. So I just want to read something that Professor Dr., may he rest in peace, he died a few years ago, Bruce Metzger, one of the most important theologians of the 20th century, whom I studied with at Princeton Seminary, and who wrote a book called Breaking the Code, which is the greatest book on Revelation ever written. Well, I haven't read every book ever written. If I had, I might not say that, but it's one that I was able to get through. Let me put it that way. But he says, to say directly that God will destroy imperial Rome would have been, of course, altogether treasonous in the eyes of the imperial authorities. So, like a prisoner writing in code from a concentration camp, John characterizes the power of evil as Babylon, just as Babylon represented to the Hebrews all that was wicked and symbolized persecution. So for John, Rome was another Babylon, the source and fountainhead of all seductive luxury and vice, living in voluptuous materialism and selfishness. But also, Babylon is allegorical of the idolatry that any nation commits when it elevates material abundance, military prowess, technological sophistication, imperial grandeur, racial pride, or any other glorification of the creature over the created.
Well, we're in Babylon again, it seems like.
I thought Metzger wrote that. I just think it's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
But basically, in my opinion, the major message of Revelation is just sit tight. It looks bad now. And if you think about what happened,
right?
What happened is the Roman Empire became Christianity. The Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire, 300-400 years later, and then the Roman Empire fell. So there is some sense that if this apocalyptic statement is about the world we're living in now, where we're suppressed by Rome, then maybe it came true. That's my idea of it. Other things were going on at that time, too, that I think affected this literature. One was that around, I always get the date of it, somewhere around 60 to 70 A.D., there was the Jewish revolution against the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire had a situation with the Jews who'd been horribly persecuted other places, where within the Roman Empire they were allowed to be Jews and worship as they wanted. And the government of Rome even helped pay for the rebuilding of the temple. But they had to pay taxes and whatever. And there was within the Jewish community under the Roman Empire, the Zealots, who said, no, we got to push forward and bring back King David and, be mighty militarily too. And overthrow this yoke. And around 66 AD, I could be wrong about the exact year, they pulled it off. They pulled off a revolution and they lost. And that was the end of the good deal with Rome. The Second Temple was destroyed by the Romans. And once again, the Jews were kidnapped and taken prisoner and oppressed and not allowed to do their religion. So everything changed then. There was also in, what year was that in? 79, AD 79, there was the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. And it completely engulfed the city of Pompeii with molten lava, destroyed ships in the Gulf of Naples. And so John's readers at the time when he was doing this and putting it out there to the churches were familiar with this. There's a point in Revelation where it talks about a mountain falling into the water and fire and all of this imagery. I think a lot of it was inspired by having been alive or around this eruption of Mount Vesuvius, which must have seemed like the end of the world.
Yeah.
And so there were all these different things going on. at the time that this was written. And I think you have to put it into that context. As apocalyptic literature, there's sort of three things that I think apocalyptic literature, which is a little different from prophetic literature. But apocalyptic literature assumes a us versus them. There's the good and there's the bad. And it's a binary choice. And then there's the idea of the lifting of a veil. So we live at a certain level of reality, but there's more going on than we perceive. And in apocalyptic literature, the symbols suggest the lifting of the veil, a peek into that other world, that bigger world.
Well, that's an interesting thing in this book. I don't know about Daniel, but the imagery of Revelation has really basically captured people's imagination throughout time. I even found William Blake had done a picture of you know, and Durer had a picture of the Whore of Babylon. And of course, there's a lot more that we'll talk about. So I think having just, I think I told you before the show, I sat down, I just reread it through just to get a sense of all the imagery. And it really was sort of difficult in a way because it's so volatile and violent and you know, the images are searing and you don't quite understand why there's so much desire to kill, you know, and I think, was it under the fifth seal where the souls are like, come on, you got to kill those other guys, you know, and don't worry, they'll be killed too. And I'm like, wow, that's very Old Testament like. And yet it is, they're also really cool, surrealistic images. Of course, you want to paint these, you know, when they describe the animals, the part with the wings and the eyes, which people don't actually put in with the animals normally when they the four corners. They're so unusual, and I don't know if that kind of imagery was usual during that time. I mean, maybe nowadays it would be, but it seems like it kind of stands out in the Bible, even that kind of imagery.
Yes. I think the most important image really is the lamb with the 7 eyes and the 7 horns. The lamb is very important in Judaic Christian mythology, starting with the idea of sacrificing a lamb. You know, you have all of the metaphor of the shepherd and the sheep. And there is the sacrificing of the lamb to God. And then during the first Passover, the Passover event, God was going to punish the people of Egypt, but the Jews who were about to escape slavery were protected by putting the blood of a lamb on the door of their house or whatever, or over the door. So you have this image of the people being protected by the blood of the lamb. Then when we have the crucifixion of Christ, Christ is called the Lamb of God. And the idea being that during the time of the prophets, God said, I don't want your sacrifices. You know, I want you to change your lives. So Christ represents God saying, I'm going to give you a sacrifice. I'm going to sacrifice my son, or I'm going to sacrifice the lamb whose blood will save you. So the lamb represents something innocent. It represents something being sacrificed. And when he's writing about, in John, when he's writing about the lamb gets up and he sits on the throne and then he shines his shoes and then he walks over and gets a cupcake. It's like, you can't picture a lamb doing all these things, but you do. And that's one of it's Jesus. It's not some lamb, you know. It comes out a lamb with 7 eyes. What does a heavenly creature need with any eyes? You know, it's the 7 eyes it's a symbol saying 7 being the number of completion. So the Lamb, Christ, sees all. That's, you know, it's that kind of coding.
Just
that the different
thinking about it
numbers
reminds me of some of the Hindu deities, the descriptions of a lot of the, you know, their 7-headed beasts. You know, you don't usually think about it. And then the number 7, we were going to talk about that, how it's repeated so many times in the book of Revelation. And I know it's the number of completion in the Bible, but in the Kabbalah, it's Nitzig. It's connected to Venus. on the right-hand pillar. And it's a very feminine energy on some level, even though it's kind of on the warrior path. And that, in my experience of working with that, is it's a very kind of potentially delusional place. But it's very creative, it's the path it's on is one of change and innovation and visionary. So it's the 7 is sort of close to the end of that path. So it's a very visionary energy. It's people can get caught though in the imagery, and it seems like people do get caught in the imagery, not always in a good way with the Book of Revelation.
Well, the imagery in all of the Bible is both beautiful and meaningful, but at the same time, there is a destructive nature to it. Because what you have, say, with Jesus, who comes from the other world, and he's trying to describe the kingdom of God to us. So it's the kingdom, he uses a metaphor that we will understand, because we have kings. Well, Christ and God, they don't have any need for kings. But he's saying, how can I say this in a way that you'll understand? So he uses real estate. Just imagine a kingdom of heaven has nothing to do really with real estate. So, but the metaphor, keeping those metaphors of God as king, Christ as king, it throws us back into the mundane in the long run. We never rise above the thinking of a king. So to me, in the book of Revelation, you have a story in which God has a plan. God sends Jesus to kind of enact that plan. So in Revelation, Jesus has gone to the angel and said, you got to tell John on the Isle of Patmos about this. Give him an idea so John receives the story from the angel, and then he has to communicate it to the 7 churches. So you have a story that comes from God to Jesus, where God's saying to Jesus, I wish I could put this in some way you'll understand. And so Jesus gets the message and he takes it to the angel. He's like, I got to say this in some way you'll understand. The angel is going to John, who is like an earthbound person who will die, immortal, who lives in this world where we got to pay the rent and we got to, feed our bodies and we got to clothe and shelter our families. And he says, how can I communicate this to you? The angel says, how can I communicate to you in a way that you'll understand? And so John is given this glimpse of this other world. And the best he can do to describe it is, this is the head of a social worker, the 7 or 8 horns, and, all of this kind of wild imagery. He's trying to describe something in a world that he doesn't understand. And yet he's been given a glimpse of. So then he has to say, how can I communicate this to the churches in a way that they will know what to do? And so I was saying, along that chain, how much water gets dropped along the way, just in terms of what the reality of this is.
Right.
So today, in our world today, we have this guy, and I'm just going to use a guy. I mean, really, it's a whole movement. But say Pat Robertson. You know who that is?
Yes.
Okay. He, in my opinion, he's the most powerful representative of Christianity in our culture because of his mastery of the media. I mean, he does not hesitate to take this stuff and apply it to today's world, the stuff in Revelation. And there are those, many of them, who believe that there is this timetable. When what I think is evident is this is material from another world, a world of immortality, where in a world of immortality, there is no use for time. There is no meaning that time has. People get into these arguments. That's evangelicals today. They get into these arguments of like, no, creation was here. There's no time for the dinosaurs. The time of God is something that there is no such thing.
Yeah, the Buddhists call it beginningless time.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're sitting in the presence of God, time has no meaning. It has no meaning. And all of that imagery is about forever time. So then when we go back to the book of Revelation and we have the story of an apocalypse, it's very metaphorical. So talking about the end of time, that's something humans may experience because they die.
Aren't they always trying to put like natural disasters with the book of Revelation, like it said this was going to happen?
Well,
And
that's all through Scripture.
When you read it, I didn't get a sense of when anything would happen. I mean, there isn't really anything in there that says in 2,000 years. I think maybe there was something with a number, but where they get this idea.
Well, there's the 1,000 years.
The 1,000 years.
There's the 1,000 years
but that's already done,
when
though.
Jesus comes and he and the good people rule the world for 1,000 years. And of course, a lot of problems get solved during that 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the end of the 1,000 years, for some inexplicable reason, they decide to release the demons. And the demons go out into the world and completely take it over, and you've got to fight the whole thing again. And then you got the natural disasters. The idea is that God is the master of history. But God is not the only author of history, because we have been given, some of that authorship has been given to us in the gift of free will. Mm-hmm. So we have free will. We can go out and do anything we want. But whatever we do has consequences. And when we do evil, then there are consequences such as natural disasters.
It's funny when you were talking about the time thing and it's starting up again, it really sounds like the Hindu view of the aeons and the procession of the aeons, because it's, you go through all these different phases and then they go back to the beginning again.
Yes.
And it's very similar.
It's cyclical.
Yeah. Life is cyclical, right?
And part of that is, if you study the structure of the book of Revelation, it seems cyclical, but what he's really doing is he gets at the end of chapter 11, he gets to the end, and then he goes back to the time of Christ and starts all over again. So it seems like there's a repetition, mm-hmm. when it's just a repetition in the describing of it. Mm. The message, as it ends, the final message is God will take away your tears. All of the violence and the horrible, the deaths, all of that stuff that's described, in my opinion, relates to what's going on in 96 AD.
Right.
It's like, this is our world.
It's a metaphor for
people
that
are
world.
dying. It's not, we didn't invent it. It's happening. And so much of the passion in it is directed toward the Roman Empire, in my view.
I think the more I think about it, there's definitely a mystical angle, but I don't know if you could prove it. Like the number 7 being the 7 chakras. And you can go back to
that's another,
Mary Magdalene and the 7, demons or whatever cast out of her. And it's just so odd, the description of the multi-headed beings and all these eyes. And when you think about it, it doesn't make sense even just to say it's a reflection of the time that was happening, the violence then. Because it's like you're slammed with this imagery. Like it really does have a crazy effect on you. And it's almost interesting to read it without knowing a lot and just see what happens to you. Like, there's an argument to say that I think I talked to you before. Like I sat down, I was going to read the Bible straight through, and I told you I couldn't make it. And you said, "Oh, that's not how you read the Bible." But there is an argument to say that it's an interesting idea because that is one of the most influential books ever. Whether you agree with being religious or not, it's probably a good idea to know what's in the Bible. But allowing it as a piece of literature, not as a religious text, to influence you. And I was just really struck. I wasn't really expecting much from reading it because I knew kind of what was in it. But I don't even know if I've ever sat through and read it through like in one sitting. I think I've looked at pieces of it. And it just has this effect on you.
Yeah, it's not that long. I mean, it is possible to do that.
Yeah, and it wasn't that long, but I found it kind of difficult. It sort of sparks something deeper in you without knowing what it is. Like maybe part of it is to shock you into moving your consciousness a little bit, to open up. Because it's the amount of the imagery. It's just, like I said, it's one after another. Like I didn't know some of the little details about the 7 bowls the angels have,
Yeah.
the golden bowls.
It's
I never
the
heard
trumpets
that.
that really get me. The bowls are certainly plagues, but the trumpets really bring bad news.
Yeah. So, but there's a lot of little things about it that I think it's kind of worth reading. But at the same time, I have to admit it was a little, it stirred me up, not necessarily in a good way. It's hard.
Well, but in what way?
Well, just the amount of violent language in it. And was it the Lamb of God with the two-edged sword coming out of his mouth? Or there's a couple times where there's some kind of two-edged sword. And, just this encouragement to kill. Like, we're going to get them, don't worry about it. We'll kill them, It's like, oh, okay. It's like, this is the same person that died on the cross. And it's like, so it's a little,
No,
disturbing
the
that
same.
way.
You're saying it's Jesus saying, "Go out and kill."
Yeah, it seems like that's the message coming from someone that said, turn the other cheek. And I know there's more to the New Testament than that, but it's such a contrast to a lot of the New Testament.
Well, but that is the dichotomy in religion right now. I know people who live in Revelation, and so you talk to somebody. Are you a Christian? Yeah, I'm a Christian. Do you know what's going to happen to people? I used to have people call me when I had Sunset Park Christian Church. They'd call and they'd say, "Do you teach what's going to happen at your church?" And it's this fascination about, oh, those people are going to go to hell. Those people will be cut off, left. And all of this religion around the rapture and being left behind and all of that kind of thing, that's not in Revelation. That stuff started in the 1830s. It's not that old. This whole concept of the rapture and this timetable. It takes some from Revelation and it takes some from the letters of Paul. It's an interpretation of that stuff. But this idea that we graft onto the book of Revelation, that it's about end time and it's a lot of that comes from that movement, which took over. It was during the Second Great Awakening in the history of American religion, and it kind of took over evangelical religion. So you have the people who came in, I'm sitting here talking to this person saying, well, all this stuff that's going to happen and these people are going to go to hell. And I'm saying, no. I came into Christianity because of Jesus, because of the do unto others, because love your neighbor. But, there's forgiveness, grace. What does that have to do with this other stuff? But in my view, I mean, there's a big dichotomy in religion right now, and it's that. It's the people that want to use it to persecute,
Right.
and it's the people who want to use it to heal the world, the inside, whatever. And they're two different things.
Isn't there, though, in the book of Revelation, there is the chosen number of people? Supposedly that isn't the 144,000 from the different tribes.
Well, okay. Okay, that number represents a multiple of 12. What is it, 12 squared or?
Maybe I'm not good at math.
Somebody out there with a pocket calculator. It's derivative of the number 12, or it's derived from the number 12. And there's so many 12s in Revelation. There's the 24, and the 24 is made up of the 12 disciples and the 12 patriarchs of the Old Testament, and then there's the 12 tribes of Judaism. So there's a lot of 12s. I believe that number represents, these are the people who have died to, in refusal to renounce God. These are the true heroes. These are the ones that, will be there. But everybody has a different interpretation of that. The Jehovah's Witnesses have this sense of there's just a certain amount of people who are going to be saved, and it's a number like that. It's not
literal.
It's far from all of us, certainly. And that way of thinking is something that it's just, I live with it and I see it all the time, but I do not relate to it at all. I don't relate to that in any way, shape, size, or form. And I don't think that that's the meaning of the book of Revelation.
Yeah, I think that's a real stretch on so many levels. And you can see however you want to approach the numbers that they mean something more than literal, just because the repetition of it. And then there's certainly people that have broken down the numbers through the Bible and have a good argument about that's a code. 12 is also the 12 zodiac signs. There's an argument for that. And it's all legitimate. There's different ways. And that's maybe one of the thing about the book of Revelation is one would want to approach it like a dream on many levels, So what is the historical possibilities? What is the psychological part? What I find fascinating is how the Western occult people took the Whore of Babylon and it turned her into something pretty good, actually, when you read what they mean by her. And when you read the description of, at least in the book of Revelation, of what she is, it's a hard sell at first. Because I knew that Crowley had and Jack Parsons and they all had embraced this Whore of Babylon as the feminine force balancing the Horus, we're meant to be in the Aeon of Horus, according to Crowley. So obviously this book has inspired all kinds of thinking, if you think about it, that all kinds of, because it is so cryptic, It's like puzzle.
It's coded, and as you said, it's just crammed full of images that get inside you and affect affect your thoughts, and that bring up other thoughts. So many of them are absolutely horrifying. And that, to me, the way I read the horror, or the place that I put the horror, is that it relates to the difficulty of life. The people who suffer, the big question in religion that comes up, that is maybe the major obstacle to somebody being religious, is why do bad things happen to good people? And in the book of Revelation, there is the one attempt to answer that in the Old Testament is the book of Job. In the book of Revelation, the answer to that is you're just not seeing the big picture. You're not seeing, God's entire plan. And it's like we have to spend some time on the griddle. Jesus Christ had to spend some time on the cross in order to be sanctified or purified or whatever, that suffering is given a certain glory in this. And when it talks about that God will seal up, is it the 144,000 that God will seal up? The sealing, like put a stamp on their forehead or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's not saving them from dying. They're going to die. He's saving their spirits and protecting their spirits. But they're going to get slaughtered.
Yeah, I guess that's why it's kind of depressing. And I mean, it's funny too, the very end where there's like sort of going to be a better time is very short. They spend very little time on what this better time is going to be after all these disasters and earthquakes and killings with the horsemen, the different colored horsemen, which is so poetic and beautiful. I mean, it's almost like Edgar Allan Poe kind of words, the way chapter 6 was one of my favorite. And of course, the opening of the seals. I love that part.
The seals are amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the seals I love. It's the horns. Those horns are hard.
And I do love the description of the Whore of Babylon. It's crazy. I mean, it's cool. It's just really shocking. It's like
the
drunk
trumpets.
on the blood of saints and martyrs or something. She's drunk on the blood. I was like, oh my God. It's very Hecate-like.
Yeah, and then there's the little scroll in chapter 10 where the angel appears with 1 foot on sea and 1 foot on land, having an open little book.
Oh, yes.
And John is instructed to eat the scroll. And it tastes sweet in his mouth, but then in his stomach it turns bitter.
Maybe it's a drug.
Well, it
sounds like it.
Sounds like what happens with me with pizza. It's it tastes good going down, but it's like once it's in there, it becomes problematic. And then the seventh trumpet is the third woe that leads to the seven bowls. The temple of God opens in heaven, where the Ark of the Covenant can be seen. There's lightnings, noises, thunderings, an earthquake, and great hail. And then you get the woman clothed with the white robe that comes out. And in all of these lists of seven, when he gets to 6, he stops and tells a little story, or gives a little sense of,
Right.
spirit. And then goes on with the 7th. And but you have the beast followed by the lamb, and it is the lamb that is the final victor of all of this. And that's the positive nature of the message. The positive nature of Christianity is that the final victor in all of this is good, that good triumphs over evil, basically, is what the message is. Just be patient. Might not happen in your lifetime. This is a bigger picture of what you're a part of. And in the bigger picture, it's God's plan, and it makes sense. And it leads to what we have at the end. You have a whole new creation, whole new world, and heaven also is recreated. So you have new heaven, new world at the end of it. And to me, what that suggests is the cyclical nature of nature. We're reborn into something else, and we continue.
Thinking about, too, when you were talking about this, I thought, in a way, it was kind of visionary for what happened with Christianity, with all the wars and crusades and death.
Yes, yes.
And that it perhaps really was a vision, and yet Christianity has conquered. I mean, look at how powerful it is. So that, I'm not saying we've gotten to the good point, but that maybe it was also a real vision of the violence that was going to follow. And because there was a lot of, Inquisition, you've got all that real violence. And when you think that, Nostradamus and people like that sometimes people see these and they don't, like you were saying, if you're in that altered state, you can't translate it so easily into words. So you do it with these sort of pictures, evocative. So maybe it was a condensed version of how Christianity would ultimately be a powerful religion after winning all these real battles, actually.
Well, it was Europe that won the battles, but it was Europe taking on Christianity that made Christianity the thing that was doing all this.
Right.
It's hard to really think that any of this was truly done in the name of Christ. Any of the killing, the oppressing, and all of that kind of thing. It's as you remarked to me before we went on the air here. It comes to a time then in the Middle Ages into the Renaissance when the church has taken over the role of Babylon. And that's why what Metzger says is that, Babylon in this writing represents Rome, but it also represents any entity that is militarily oppressive and is all about wealth and is all about the power on earth over others. That's who becomes Babylon then.
And I didn't mean to say that this was really Christ's message, but that thinking more from the person who received the vision, that perhaps it really was a real vision, that he didn't understand what he was seeing was some of the negative interpretation of Christianity, and that he
yes, I think so
clothed
too, yeah.
it in that, and maybe he himself was frightened by it.
Yeah.
I mean, Stephen King says he wrote horror books because he had a lot of nightmares. So maybe this was his nightmare, in a sense. And he, even though that you can look at it symbolically too, you cannot go past the fact that this is a very violent book. I would like to say, because I love symbolism, but when you can't overlook that in comparison with other books in the Bible that are a little more balanced with the violence, and so perhaps it was a real vision too. So again, all these different ways of looking at the book of Revelation are very intriguing to me. Like the more you talk about it, you can see different angles.
There's so much in Revelation also that reaches back to the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, there are some very violent books. If you look at, Joshua, Judges, and the 1st and 2nd Samuel, it's just constant warfare. And incredibly violent things happen. Now, those are told more in a narrative form.
Right.
Without the kind of, there is the relationship with God and the way God intrudes into history. But in Revelation, you have the magic reality.
Right.
And it's all, again, there's nothing really that happens in Revelation other than this guy sitting there in Patmos, and he has this inner, this thing. Right. And he sees all this that has been told by Jesus to the angel to tell him and try to get him to see. But it's all a vision. It's all a dream. It's a dream that he sets down, and he believes that it is his job to take it to the 7 churches, which is the reason why the book exists. So he can somehow describe all this to the 7 churches. The message to you read all of Revelation, so you know that it starts with letters to each church.
Right.
And, this is your specific problem, and this is what you should do. There's some of the churches, he says, you got to really straighten up. To the others of the churches, he says, you guys are doing a great job. Stay the way you are, and you should be recognized. But he has a specific little message to each of the 7 churches at that time. And then having done that, having addressed them specifically, he goes on to describe the vision, but there's no advice given other than, hey, keep faith in God. Keep, do not be bullied into worshiping another god or worshiping an idol or any of that. Don't go into that. Stay with God. That's the message that he's giving them in terms of what can they do. There's nothing they can do to avoid all of these horrible things that he's suggesting are coming. This is simply God's plan. That's what's really scary about
that
it.
Is.
Because in the prophetic literature, the prophet is saying, change your ways or...
Right, this will happen.
That's not the message here. It's just it's the lifting of a veil. And as we were talking about earlier, the similarities to Hinduism, I think, are great, because in Hinduism you have this idea that the reality that you and I are living out right now is not the real reality. It's illusion. It's an illusion that we're sharing. That there's another reality that is more real. And all of these gods are dancing around in this reality, and all these images of the elephant-headed god or whatever come from there. And it's not a world that we get. It's not a world that we totally understand. But when someone has what I guess Chinese Buddhism or Japanese Buddhism would call a satori, which is the lifting of a veil, you see something more than the mundane reality. And you are given an insight into something deep, if you can interpret it right, or if you can be open to it. So it's what John is doing to the 7 churches is he's dealing out one of these after another. Look at this, look at this, look at this. I think that it doesn't really go into the future as far as most people think it does. I mean, I think it's really about the right now. And that in some ways, if you look at it that way, you can say, well, that is kind of how it happened. But to take this material and use what's going on today, I think that's a real treacherous path. And that's what the evangelicals do, is they say, well, we had the hurricane because we're tolerating homosexuality. And this material, the downside to this kind of material is it seems to promote that. It seems to promote that kind of thinking.
Well, yes and no, because they're cherry picking because it also is against the materialism, the Book of Revelation, where all these people are just
Western Christians
bathing
ignore
and
that.
they ignore the most obvious
That's the
sin.
thing. That's the thing I never
Yeah.
get. I never
Yeah.
get how you miss that.
It's
That's in the Gospels, but it's in this too.
Yes, it's in that, very much so. You get that sense, the greed, and so there's
And you don't have to worry about homosexuality so much when the greed is really what's happening.
yes,
Start with that.
Mm-hmm.
And we worship it. We worship it in our culture. And that's the problem. Right there.
yeah. I mean, if you read like some of the description of do I have it? I had it. I thought the Whore of Babylon. I have it somewhere, I thought. Maybe I didn't bring it. I thought I did. There's that. Chapter 6, 17, the 7 angels. Oh, that's a different one. I wrote that down. That's a different... No, I don't think I brought it after all that. But the description of her is like, this kind of like, over like abundance and her, obscenities or whatever that she has. And if she's supposed to be a symbol of the church, it's obviously she's a symbol of excess.
Well, and that's
pleasure.
And that's the Roman Empire at this time. If you think about where the Roman Empire went during the first century, it was in that direction of total self-indulgence that Gibbon tells us led to the fall of the Roman Empire, and a weakening of morals and all.
Well, that was it later. I thought I read somewhere later that someone also thought it was a symbol of what Catholicism was becoming. I guess you can interpret the Book of Revelation according to the time.
Well, that's interesting what you're saying, because if you look at the history of the way Revelation has been looked at during the early Protestant Reformation, they immediately attached the images
what it was. I remember. Yeah.
of Revelation to the Roman Catholic Church.
Right.
And the Roman Catholic Church at that time had become very much like the Roman Empire had become during the first century.
Right.
They were deep in the practice of indulgence, selling indulgences. There was a lack of morals in the priesthood at that time. That was one of the things that led to the Protestant Reformation. It was one of the things that Luther seized upon and was able to make great hay with. And so to the early Protestants, I don't think today so much the evangelicals point it at the Catholics. Mm-hmm. I think they point it at the liberals. I think they point it at the idea of racial plurality, cultural plurality, and the recognition of homosexuals as human beings and all of this kind of thing. That's what they point this at. Mm-hmm. So, and they act and preach and speak as if they are the ones who are being oppressed.
Mm-hmm. They're not.
Well, it's hard to see what's doing it. It's like when people complain about political correctness. Oh, we got to get rid of this political correctness. It's killing us. It's like, yeah, what about it is killing us? Why is it destructive to think about using words that are more humanistic? Why is that so bad? Why is that killing us? And they say, well, it's against free speech and all this. It's like, who is the police for political correctness? Nobody. Who's getting put in jail in our country?
That's true.
Nobody. There are places where it happens.
That's true.
But we don't have that. And it's just this desire to make your point through claiming to be persecuted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Nothing does in our country, largely speaking. I mean, there's exception to every rule. But
it's like the Me Too movement. The general thought about the Me Too movement is like, oh, they just took over. They went too far, and now you can't say or do anything. It's like, no, the Me Too movement didn't really change anything. Mm-hmm. people, women are still treated that way. It's still going on. They didn't go too far, but that's how they fight that. And in the evangelical world, you have something that's not, it's maybe implied by the culture that the Bible comes out of, but the power of the Anglo male is just sacrosanct in everything. And when you're in that point of view, and you don't see that you're doing it, or you don't see that you're putting the Anglo male as the definition of good. If you don't see that you're doing that, you don't understand what you're doing to people.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about the whore of Babylon, that's you said there was a book about where the whore of Babylon is the main character or something like that?
Oh, well, the Western occult has taken the whore of Babylon and really, like Aleister Crowley especially, it's the lust card. And he has a whole, religious tenement around her as being this new force that balances the force of Horus. I don't know it very well. I was only, recently reading about it from the point of view of Jack Parsons, who was, famous for he's a rocket engineer and started JPL, and he's a famous occultist that died at 37 years old. But he had a ritual that's published about, I forget what it's called, Babylon, in it, where he invoked the whore of Babylon. And it's both an energy, and real women can hold that office. So that was like, Crowley's Scarlet Women. He met Marjorie Cameron after he invoked this whole ritual. So women can actually embody this sort of wild force. And that's part of what Crowley calls is the new aeon. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around what it is, this force. And when you look at it literally, if I was to look at it literally, I'd go, ooh, as a woman. But that's not what it's meant. And there's a lot more interesting things around that because of it's also connected to something that Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelly channeled when they were scrying this force that was the Babylon force. And it's this beautiful poetic description that ends up sounding like something from Thunder Perfect Mind, which had not been discovered at that point. And so there's a parallel to this. It's this female with this contradictory energy. I'm a virgin, I'm a whore, I'm this, I'm that. That seems to be what the whore of Babylon has become for the Western occult. So it's an interesting idea. But having read the Book of Revelations, you kind of think, well, was that the intention? I don't know. I have no idea. and we do know that some of the the Bible is on the backdrop of some of these ancient goddesses. You can see that the influence Astarte and things like that, and the struggle of that historically. So she's it's a fascinating. It's obviously I think the more I listen to you, I really feel like someone did. They were on some kind of acid trip. I think that's true because it really seems so surreal, the whole thing, and it's so provocative and makes you keep thinking about all kinds of things. And maybe that's the real blessing of it.
And even the Book of Daniel doesn't lay it out that way. The Book of Daniel is a straighter narrative. Mm-hmm. There are dreams. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And God appears in dreams, and you get some of that in the prophets, but you don't get the wild images in the Book of Daniel that you do in the Book of Revelation.
Yeah, it's amazing. It got accepted, if you think about it, that the book was accepted into the Bible at some point, the Book of Revelation, because it is so different.
Yes. In
its approach to writing, how it, wants to convey the message is not the traditional way, even for the Bible, in a sense. Maybe for other forms of literature, like Hinduism, with all their crazy deities, but this is different.
Yes, I'm trying to think of a Hindu scripture that would be something like this, that would have this kind of surreal nature, and maybe parts of the Bhagavad Gita approach that.
You do, at least in the descriptions.
Yeah,
and they do have a lot of battles with
the battle is a big part of it. Yeah, the guy's on his way to battle. Anyway, I hear the theme music.
Yes, we are wrapping it up. So, any last word you want to say about the Book of Revelation quickly?
Well, if you haven't read the Book of Revelation, look at its context before you do. That would be. I mean, I get that you just read it and had a great time, but you probably knew enough about the context going in that if you don't try this trick at home. Some of the things they do in Revelation, don't try that trick.
That's a good advice. So thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope you had a good time and made you think. And subscribe to us, like us. We love your comments even after the fact. And we look forward to seeing you next week when we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure. Have a great week.